Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The crystal flute shattered against the marble floor, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the hushed opulence of the VIP lounge. But the silence that followed was far more deafening. Julian's wrist was being crushed. The grip around his slender bones was like a vice of hot iron, unyielding and terrifyingly strong. He gasped. The air seized from his lungs not by physical force, but by the sheer, predatory aura radiating from the man sitting in the velvet armchair. Renjiro Takeda, the Oyabun of the Black Lotus Syndicate, did not look at the spilled champagne foaming on the expensive rug. His eyes, dark as an abyssal trench and sharp as obsidian shards, were locked onto Julian's trembling face. Julian had tried to be subtle. He had tried to slide the folded napkin under the stem of the glass, a desperate, silent plea for survival. Instead, he had triggered a reflex honed by years of assassination attempts. Renjiro hadn't seen a savior. He had sensed a threat. "Who sent you?" Renjiro's voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the thumping bass from the club below, yet it vibrated through Julian's very marrow. I didn't," Julian stammered, his other hand instinctively clutching the tray to his chest as a shield. "The drink. Please." Renjiro tightened his grip, pulling Julian down until their faces were inches apart. The scent hit them both simultaneously. It wasn't the metallic tang of fear or the cheap cologne of a servant. It was the scent of rain-soaked wisteria, a rare, crisp, and intoxicating omega pheromone that Julian had been suppressing with illegal blockers for years. The stress of the moment had burned through the drugs. Renjiro's pupils dilated, swallowing the iris. The alpha in him roared, a primal beast waking from a long slumber. But the Mafia Don remained in control. He glanced down at the crumpled napkin caught between Julian's fingers, the hand he was currently crushing. He snatched it with his free hand, unfolding it with a flick of his thumb. * Don't drink it. Leave now. * Renjiro's eyes narrowed. He looked at the spilled champagne, then at the trembling waiter, and finally, toward the shadows of the mezzanine where his allies were watching. "Interesting," Renjiro murmured, the lethal tension in his shoulders shifting into something darker, more possessive. "It seems the little mouse has saved the cat." 3 hours earlier, Julian had been invisible. That was his specialty. As an Omega working in the Gilded Cage, a high-end hostess club in the heart of the neon-drenched district, invisibility was the only armor he had. He was a gray, a derogatory term for unregistered Omegas who worked off debts they could never hope to pay. His father's gambling addiction had sold Julian into this life, and for 3 years, he had poured drinks, lit cigarettes, and kept his eyes on the floor. Tonight was different. The air in the club was thick, suffocating. The Black Lotus clan was here for a peace treaty with the Viper Syndicate. Everyone knew peace treaties in the underworld were just wars paused for breath. Julian had been restocking the private pantry when he heard them. 2 men, their voices hushed but carrying the distinct, slippery cadence of the Vipers. "The toxin is tasteless," one had whispered. "It mimics a cardiac arrest. By the time Takeda hits the floor, we'll be out the back. And the boy serving him? Collateral. Kill him to sell the panic." Julian had frozen, a bottle of vintage whiskey clutched to his chest. He didn't know Renjiro Takeda. He only knew the stories, that he was a monster, a man who had burned down an entire city block to avenge his brother, a man who possessed no heart, only a cold, calculating engine of violence. But Julian knew what it was to be collateral. He knew what it was to be discarded. And, perhaps more dangerously, he felt a strange, magnetic pull toward the VIP booth that defied all logic. It was a biological imperiousness, a tug in his gut that whispered danger and destiny in the same breath. He couldn't let it happen. It was suicide to intervene, but it was a death sentence to stay silent. Now, standing in the center of the VIP lounge with his wrist turning purple in Takeda's grip, Julian realized he might have just chosen a different executioner. Renjiro stood up, pulling Julian flush against his tailored suit. The sudden proximity made Julian's knees weak. The Alpha's scent was overwhelming: cedarwood, smoke, and old leather. It was a scent that commanded submission, yet Julian found himself looking up, meeting the predator's gaze. "If you are lying," Ranjiro whispered against Julian's ear, his voice a caress of velvet and steel, "I will peel the skin from your bones. If you are telling the truth." He didn't finish the sentence. Ranjiro abruptly released Julian's wrist, only to slide his hand down to the small of Julian's back, pulling him into a rigid, protective embrace. The sudden shift from violence to possession was disorienting. "Gentlemen," Ranjiro announced, his voice projecting across the room to the table where the Viper representative sat, frozen with fake smiles. "My companion is feeling unwell. The air in here is stifling." The head of the Viper clan, a man with a jagged scar running through his eyebrow, stood up slowly. "Takeda-san, we have yet to toast. It is bad luck to leave a cup full." "It is worse luck to drink poison," Ranjiro replied, his tone conversational, bored even. The room exploded into motion. The Viper boss flipped the table. Glass shattered. Guns were drawn from holsters with the speed of striking snakes. Julian cried out as Ranjiro shoved him down behind the heavy oak bar, flipping the solid wood table onto its side as a makeshift barricade in one fluid motion. "Stay down," Ranjiro commanded. He drew a silver-plated semi-automatic from his jacket. His face was no longer that of the sophisticated businessman. It was the face of the demon of Kyoto. Bullets chipped away at the marble pillars. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of shouts and gunfire. Julian curled into a ball, covering his ears. He was going to die. He was going to die because he tried to be a hero. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his collar. Ranjiro hauled him up. "Move. Now." They moved through the chaos like ghosts. Ranjiro was a storm of efficiency, firing with precision, clearing a path through the back exit. He didn't let go of Julian. His grip on Julian's arm was bruising, an anchor in the storm. They burst into the cool night air of the alleyway. A black armored sedan screeched to a halt in front of them. Ranjiro threw the back door open and shoved Julian inside, diving in after him as bullets sparked against the reinforced pavement. "Go!" Ranjiro barked at the driver. The car roared away, leaving the violence behind, but the tension inside the vehicle was thick enough to choke on. Julian pressed himself against the leather door, hyperventilating. His adrenaline was crashing, leaving him shaking violently. He stared at Ranjiro. The Alpha was checking the clip of his gun, his face impassive, but his eyes were burning. Ranjiro holstered the weapon and turned slowly to Julian. He reached out. Julian flinched. Ranjiro paused, his hand hovering in the air. "I am not going to strike you." He took Julian's hand, the one he had crushed earlier. He examined the red welts forming on the pale skin. "I applied too much pressure. I assumed you were an assassin. A needle under a coaster is a common technique. I just wanted to warn you," Julian whispered, his voice hoarse. "Why?" Ranjiro asked. It was the same question as before, but the tone was different. It was genuinely curious. "You are a server, a debt slave, judging by the lack of a collar but the fear in your posture. If I died, the chaos might have freed you." "They were going to kill me too," Julian admitted, looking down. "Collateral damage. But," he hesitated. "But, I couldn't watch them do it. Not like that. It was cowardly." Ranjiro laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. "Cowardly? Boy, honor is a ghost story we tell ourselves to feel better about the blood on our hands." "But," he leaned in, inhaling deeply near Julian's neck. "You smell like winter." Julian flushed. "My suppressants. They wore off." "Good," Ranjiro murmured. "I hate the smell of chemicals." The car slowed as it entered a private underground garage. "We are going to my safe house. You cannot return to the club. The Vipers will hunt anyone who was in that room." "I have nowhere else," Julian said, a tear finally escaping. "My debt holder. He will kill me if I don't return." Your debt is bought, Renjiro said simply, as if discussing the weather. As of the moment you saved my life, you became my responsibility. And I take my property very seriously. Property. The word hung in the air. Julian looked at the man. This beautiful, terrifying monster. He should be running. He should be terrified. But the Omega in him was purring, settling into the presence of an Alpha powerful enough to keep the world at bay. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the city skyline. It was cold, impersonal, and breathtaking. Renjiro led Julian to a massive bathroom, the walls lined with black marble. Clean yourself. There is blood on your shirt, and it isn't yours. Julian washed his face, the water running pink into the basin. He stared at his reflection. His eyes were wide, pupils blown. He looked different. Alive. When he emerged, wearing a silk robe he found hanging on the door, Renjiro was waiting in the living room. He had poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. Cognac, Renjiro said, extending a glass. Not poisoned. I poured it myself. Julian took it with shaking hands. Thank you. Sit. Julian sat on the edge of the sprawling sofa. Renjiro sat opposite him, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. The distance between them felt electrically charged. What is your name? Julian. Julian Vane. Vane. Renjiro tasted the name. A fallen house. Your father was a fool who bet against the wrong horses. He was, Julian whispered. And now you pay his price. Renjiro stood up and walked over to Julian. He towered over him, casting a long shadow. Do you know why I grabbed your hand, Julian? Julian shook his head. Because for the first time in 10 years, my instincts were confused. Renjiro admitted, his voice dropping an octave. I saw the threat, but I felt the pull. Do you believe in fate, Julian? I believe in bad luck, Julian replied, clutching his robe tighter. They are 2 sides of the same coin. Renjiro reached down and tilted Julian's chin up. His thumb brushed over Julian's lower lip. You saved the devil tonight. Do you expect a reward? I just want to survive. Survival is the baseline, Renjiro scoffed. You deserve more than survival. You have fire in you. I felt it when you looked me in the eye while I was crushing your wrist. Most men would have fainted. You defied me. Renjiro's eyes darkened. I want to keep you. It wasn't a question. It was a decree. As what? Julian asked, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. A servant? A pet? As my conscience, Renjiro said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. And perhaps, as my equal, if you can survive me. He leaned down, and for a terrifying moment Julian thought he would bite. Instead, Renjiro pressed his forehead against Julian's. The contact was intimate, searing. The bond, the fated connection that the legends spoke of, snapped into place with the force of a breaking dam. Julian gasped, feeling the Alpha's emotions flood him. Possessiveness, rage, and a deep, aching loneliness. The Vipers will come for us, Renjiro whispered. They will try to finish what they started. Let them come, Julian found himself saying, the fear replaced by a strange, newfound strength drawn from the man before him. Renjiro pulled back, looking at Julian with a new appreciation. Yes, let them come. And we will burn them together. The following weeks were a blur of violence and luxury. Julian was no longer the invisible waiter. He was the shadow at Renjiro's right hand. He learned that the note had been the turning point not just for Renjiro's life, but for the underworld's balance of power. Renjiro decimated the Viper clan. He didn't do it with messy street wars. He did it with surgical precision, dismantling their assets, exposing their corruption, and leaving them penniless before delivering the final blow. But the hardest battle was fought within the walls of the penthouse. Renjiro was a difficult man. He was arrogant, demanding, and accustomed to absolute obedience. Julian, however, had spent a lifetime kneeling, and he had decided he was done. They fought. They argued over strategy, over morality, over what to have for dinner. and every argument ended the same way. One rainy evening, 3 months after the incident at the club, Julian stood by the window, watching the city lights bleed through the rain. Renjiro walked in, his suit jacket discarded, his shirt unbuttoned at the top. He looked tired. He wrapped his arms around Julian from behind, resting his chin on Julian's shoulder. The touch was no longer rigid. It was familiar, necessary. "They found your father," Renjiro said quietly. Julian stiffened. "Is he?" "He is alive. I bought his remaining debts. He has been placed in a rehabilitation facility in Zurich. He will never bother you again, nor will anyone hold his sins over your head." Julian turned in Renjiro's arms, eyes searching the Alpha's face. "Why? That cost you millions." "You are worth more than millions," Renjiro said, his expression serious. "You are the only person who saw a gun pointed at my head and chose to step in front of it. You are my partner, Julian. My mate." Julian reached up, tracing the sharp line of Renjiro's jaw. "I didn't step in front of it for Renjiro the boss. I did it for you." "I know." Renjiro captured Julian's hand, the hand he had once nearly crushed, and kissed the knuckles with reverence. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Julian take control of his destiny, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a man who crushed your hand before he kissed it? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,